Good evening. Welcome to Democracy Dialogues. I'm Gail Sunderman, and I'm chair of the Democracy Dialogues Committee. This is a new initiative sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Maryland. The aim of Democracy Dialogues is to provide our members and the public with nonpartisan information on a range of current issues that impact Maryland. Sorry.
Gail Sunderman, she's the chair of the committee that put this program together.
Let me ask you all to please mute yourself. And I'm sorry about that phone. I turned my phone off, but so anyway, let's get back to it. So Democracy Dialogues, the aim is to provide our members and the public with nonpartisan information on a range of issues and how they impact Maryland. Tonight is our inaugural event, and so we're so glad that you're joining us. We have a number of programs in the pipeline, so keep your eye out for emails with additional information. Before I introduce our guest, I want to say a word about the League of Women Voters of Maryland. The League is a nonpartisan grassroots organization that is part of the League of Women Voters United States. We've been around since 1920. That's over 100 years. Our mission is to defend democracy and empower voters. We encourage informed and active participation in government through education and nonpartisan issue-based advocacy around major public policy issues. And we also promote voting rights in Maryland. We have 16 local leagues in Maryland, representing 20 of the 24 jurisdictions in the state. When I talk about the league, I like to point out that it is one organization where you can actively participate. There's so many organizations today that just want your money. Now, we want that too, but more than that, we want you to join and participate in the league. There's many ways to get involved, both through your local league and the state league. Some of the things we do include advocacy in Annapolis. Local leagues are active in voter registration, especially in registering new voters at colleges and in the high schools. We sponsor candidate forums so you can hear from people running for office in your area. We also put out voter guides for every election so voters know what's on the ballot. This includes an online version at vote411.org. We also sponsor a number of events like this one tonight. So if you aren't already a member, I urge you to join. You can go to LWV.org to find your local league. I think we'll try to put that information in the chat. So if you're interested, we'd love to have you as a member. If you are a member and want more information or want to get more involved, please go to LWVMD.org. So we are delighted to have with us tonight Elaine Weiss, who will be talking about her new book, Spell Freedom: The Underground Schools That Built the Civil Rights Movement. Elaine Weiss is an award-winning journalist and author of books of narrative history, and she's also from Baltimore. In addition to writing books, she does magazine feature writing and has been recognized with prizes from the Society of Professional Journalists. Elaine is the author of the highly acclaimed narrative history, The Women's Hour, The Great Fight to Win the Vote. This book has been described as riveting, nail-biting political thriller. And it has powerful parallels to today's political environment. The Women's Hour received the American Bar Association highest honor, the 2019 Silver Gravel Award. And I must note that the League of Women Voters is featured prominently in this book. Her new book, Spell Freedom, which we will hear about tonight, has been described as a beautifully crafted and dramatic tale, which through elegant writing, masterful storytelling, and rigorous research takes us on a journey for freedom. I've been reading the book, and I can tell you that's really true. It's a very engaging book. Moderating the discussion is Dr. Karson Whitehead. Dr. Whitehead is the founding executive director of the Karson Institute for Race, Peace, and Social Justice, and a professor of communication and African American Studies at Loyola University, Maryland. The Karson Institute focuses on questions around racial justice, racial and social justice. Its goal is to tell the stories that made our nation as well as capture the stories that are currently being told. Some of you may have heard her on WEAA 88.9 FM radio, where she hosts a daily award-winning radio show, Today with Dr. Kaye. This show engages with the community around issues happening in Baltimore City and around the country. In addition, she's the author of 4 books and the recipient of many awards for her scholarship, teaching, and community work. Before I turn it over to our guest tonight, we will, I'm going to ask you to put your questions in chat. Zoom recently changed how they operate that. So what you have to do is you go to chat, and at the top, you need to click the box that says select new chat. And then this will direct your questions to Nikki Tyree, who is our executive director, and will be moderating the question and answer session at the end of the talk. So without any further ado, let's get started. And thank you very much for attending.
Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here to have this conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed the book, and so I'm ready to kind of dig in because I had to sit with the book for a while. Given what is happening politically around the country, the parallels between this moment that you begin with in 1954, and I want to have you kind of begin there, but that it takes us through this fight for democracy, to expand democracy so it includes everyone, which is similar to today. And so I think there are lessons to be learned from the book that I want to pull out in our discussion. But Elaine, I want to start with you just kind of framing the book for us and kind of pulling us into the conversation before we get started with some of the questions.
Thank you, Kaye. It's just a pleasure to be with you, especially, and the League. I'm a member of the League. But I know that you understand this book deeply from your research, from your community work, from your journalistic work. So I begin the book on the day that the Brown v. Board of Education decision comes down from the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, the movement to gain equal rights and voting rights for Black Americans did not begin on that day, but it is a turning point. And it becomes a moment when, for the first time, the United States federal government really says, you know, segregation is unconstitutional. They've been working since 1895 from the Plessy decision, which had said segregation and public accommodations is okay as long as they're separate but equal. They were never equal. They were always just separate. And so this becomes a moment when things seem possible. And all the foment and all the organizing that's been taking place over the last several decades really begins to flower. And so I introduce my 4 main characters on that day, May 17th, 1954. And the first one, and the one that I think readers will really come to embrace, is an amazing woman named Septima Clark. She, at this moment in 1954, is a 56-year-old school teacher, and she's been teaching for 40 years in segregated schools. She's been a member of the NAACP since she began teaching. She's like 16, she's about 18 or 19 when she joins, just about 10 years after the NAACP was founded. She is a community worker. Besides being a teacher, she believes in community. So she is on every social and political betterment organization in South Carolina and in her home city of Charleston. And for many years, she lives in the capital of Columbia. And this idea of working in community is extremely important to her. She's a church woman. She is an active club woman. She's a sorer in AKA. She is a woman who truly believes that liberation can come from community. And she also believes in education. Education is the key, both for her students who are working in impoverished schools that are overcrowded and certainly underfunded. Um, and she is on the executive board of the NAACP of Charleston. And she has a very interesting relationship with a federal judge, a white federal judge, who becomes a very important figure in the Brown decision. And so you will learn a bit about her in this first chapter. She sees this day as a sort of clarion call to her that she wants to get involved. She wants to make this happen. She wants to get her community ready for desegregation in the schools. The next person that you will meet is an extraordinary man named Esau Jenkins. And he has grown up on an impoverished and isolated sea island off the coast of Charleston. And he has about a fourth grade education, but he's a very, very smart man. And he is very devoted. Again, he is a community worker. He believes in the betterment of his neighbors, of his church, of his community. And he realizes that his community is going to remain poor and and um, faced with injustice, both in the criminal justice system and in not being able to serve on juries, being beaten, being lynched, unless they have political power. They need economic power and political power. And he goes about figuring out ways on his own to do this. And he starts clubs, citizen clubs, voting clubs. And he really sees the future, both to desegregate the schools on his island, to give opportunity to his children and his neighbors' children, but also the power of the vote, the power to make the white political structure in South Carolina listen to all of their constituents. And so he will become a driving force in this incredible adventure that we're going to go on. I also introduce a really bubbly, buoyant woman named Bernice Robinson, who's a hairdresser. She is a beautician, but she's also an activist. And she uses her beauty parlor as an NAACP outpost. She also serves, as does Esau, on the NAACP board in Charleston. And she makes sure that her clients get a good dose of politics when they come and they talk about what's going on in the community, what's wrong. They talk about political affairs. She says, look, if you're nervous about your husband or your father or your boss or your pastor, knowing that you belong to the NAACP because it was considered a bit controversial, why don't you have them address? Why don't you use my shop as your address? And you can, no one will know. And she empowers these women to talk about civic matters and to become involved. And so she will become really the woman who shapes the citizenship schools. And the next is a white man named Myles Horton, who founds a school called the Highlander Folk School, which will become a pivotal center for civil rights activism, and he'll be punished for this. And I think one of the things we experience in the book is the incredible courage of all of these people, both the ones who are my central characters and then all the ones who are working with them, because they will face incredible pressure, incredible violence, and incredible intimidation. And I think seeing them go through that is one of the things that gives me some inspiration right now.
What I appreciate about the book is that as soon as the book opens, you start with this portrait, kind of this snapshot
Mhm.
of each of the central characters. I mean, I laid out in my copy, you know, the teacher, the businessman, and I did
Right.
make a note that here's a businessman with a fourth grade education who worked on memorizing the South Carolina Constitution. I am from South Carolina, and his idea that you need to know, you know, the Constitution so you can vote. Thinking, of course, about Bernice as a beautician, but the
Mhm.
fact that she grew up in Charleston, moved to New York, and
Yeah,
came back to Charleston to take care of her parents, I think actually helps with that personality being formed, being
exactly.
in New York and kind of being a part of that. And
Exactly.
then I think I'll start with Myles though, because he is the one that when we're introduced on what you call the Catalyst Day, which is
Yes.
May 17th, 1954, him going there, going into the courts, meeting up with Thurgood Marshall, you know, on the day of decision, because I know newspapers at that time, you have a, you know, as a journalism in your background, that newspapers had been standing by for the decision. And they
Right.
had been running this kind of headline going, they didn't know if the day was going to be black, white, or brown, right? Like what was
Exactly.
going to
Exactly.
happen.
Yeah.
So, can you talk about how that shaped Myles to actually find out the decision before that decision is going to be announced before it's actually announced?
Yeah. So Myles Horton is this fascinating man. He grows up poor, uh, in a sharecropper's son. You know, there were very many poor white people in the South too, and he's certainly one of them. But he does get an education. He has to put himself through high school even. He has to go to the nearest town and put himself, earn money to go to high school, goes to college, goes to graduate school, even goes to divinity school for a while. And comes back and wants to help his neighbors in Appalachia um, learn to solve problems on their own. And so he too believes in community. And he starts the Highlander School in the depths of the Depression, 1932. It becomes a labor organizing center for education and for learning how to organize, how to demand uh, equal treatment, safe treatment in the mills, in the mines of that region. And around 1950, he pivots Highlander's curriculum. Basically, it's like a retreat center. You come for a week or two and talk with like-minded people or even people who disagree with you, and really come to some ideas of how do we approach how in a divided nation. We've always been divided. You know, it's a fairy tale to say that we were ever not divided in some way. How do you come up with a consensus and a way forward? And so Myles got to know and work very closely with the leaders of the emerging Black movement, especially Thurgood Marshall, who was taking up a lot of the cases, including one of the ones at a part of the Brown decision. And one of the things I was so struck with was seeing the development of that Brown decision. I mean, again, my very simplistic idea of this before I went into the research was, oh, it was about Oliver Brown. He's the named
Praise the
plaintiff.
Lord. Yep.
And you know, he's in this faraway state, and it's about him. Look, it's actually five different pieces.
Cases.
And one of them comes out of South Carolina. And we see that case evolve, and we see the parents who pushed for desegregation of their school in a rural area of South Carolina. And what happens to them? They all lose their jobs for signing that petition. But Myles gets to know Thurgood Marshall and many of the others, Robert Carter, the other legal defense fund lawyers who were working all through the South. And he happened to be in Washington because he was in some trouble too. He and Highlander were being harassed and accused of being communist for supporting civil rights. And again, echoes of that right now. But he happened to literally, he had some free time. He walked into the court to kind of just look around, be a tourist. He did not know that they were going to be making that decision. Even Thurgood Marshall didn't know. Someone tipped him off. He was on a business trip and he got on a plane to get to Washington, be there that morning. It was sort of not official notification. And so Myles is there at that moment. And everyone comes rushing out and he sees his friend Thurgood Marshall. He says, "What's going on?" And Thurgood Marshall yells, "We won, we won." And they go down and they get the first copy coming out of the print shop. And for Myles too, this moment means he's got to go all in. He's got to really ramp up what Highlander is doing. And so we will see Highlander become a center both for strategizing, comfort, inspiration for the young sit-in demonstrators in Nashville, including John Lewis, the Freedom Riders. As the movement progresses, you see how Highlander influences many parts of the movement.
And I want to talk about kind of that influence because you paint the picture of how each one of the central characters make their way to Highlander. Now, out of all of them, the one I'm most familiar with, of course, is Mrs. Clark. Because of the number of times she's been photographed, because of the school named after her, because of the award she received from Jimmy Carter. Like she is someone that, in terms of names of the civil rights movement, you associate her name with Highlander. But going back to how she got there, you know that she mentioned that she was trying to really express the number one problem that she thought in the Black community, and she called it apathy and passivity. So can you talk a little bit about the ways in which she kind of framed her work at the Highlander to actually strike at the roots of these two things that she believed was holding people back, primarily the Black community, being apathetic and being passive?
That's a wonderful question, Kay. And I want to frame it a little bit in that Septima in her community work has been pushing to get the clubs, the tuberculosis club, Association of Charleston is segregated. And she says, this is ridiculous. Why aren't we together? Why isn't it one organization? This is duplicate. So she's been pushing for a long time. And she comes to Highlander because someone tells her that this is a place where Blacks and whites can be together and actually talk honestly. They also live together, which is against the Jim Crow laws. So it's an extraordinary experience when she spends just 6 weeks after the Brown decision, later that summer, actually kind of late spring, she goes to Highlander on a scholarship. She writes for a scholarship. She says, I'm a poor school teacher. I can't afford it. And so she has already confronted apathy in her community. It's hard to get people to stand up. When you think of it, they are afraid with valid reason. They're afraid of their jobs. They're afraid of their livelihoods. And she tries to break through, and she wants to go to Highlander to learn some strategies and skills and tactics for awakening her community. So she goes back from that first week, which is it just galvanizes her. And she'd never slept in a room with a white woman before. you know, because it's a dormitory style, and
Mhm.
two in a room, and she's just like up all night thinking about this. It's both wonderful and frightening, and so it really makes a difference to her. She goes back and she is just out there literally on soapboxes, talking to the Black labor unions, to churches, to civic organizations, and saying, send people to Highlander. They'll learn how to stand up. And this passivity she will encounter and rail against in her private communication too, for many years. One of the things she finds is that some pastors, well, many of them were very, very deeply involved and become their churches become centers and sanctuaries for the movement. Others are hesitant, and she just has no patience for this. Um, we'll see that in 1956, she is fired from her job as a teacher after 40 years
Yeah.
of being a teacher. She loses her pension. Why? Because the state of South Carolina, as part of the massive resistance against Brown, basically the southern states, officially declare we are not going to follow the Supreme Court, the law of the land. We're just not. Again, this echo is really kind of frightening right now, but they sign up the Congress, Southern representatives in Congress sign something called the Southern Manifesto. And then the state legislatures take this up and they have their own manifestos saying, we are not going to follow this. And we're going to try to quash this emerging movement for equality. And so one of the things they do is they outlaw the NAACP. They go after the organizations that are helping people realize what their rights are. And Septima, who's been a proud member of the NAACP all her adult life, says, no, I'm not going to resign. Oh, part of this was no municipal worker, no teacher, garbage man, policeman, no municipal employee could belong to the NAACP and keep their job. And she says, this is ridiculous. I'm going to stand up for this. And she writes letters to the 700 Black teachers in Charleston, and says, who are members, and says, we've got to stand together. Let's stand together. We'll walk into the superintendent's room. We'll say, you can't fire us all. Where are the children going to go? And we'll have strength in solidarity. And they're frightened. And it's one of the it's a lesson for her. She says, I didn't prepare them enough. By the time very few respond, the few that do chicken out when it's time to go see the superintendent, it ends up at Septima and like two other people, and he throws them out, and she's fired. And that's when she works at Highlander. And she says, this is going to be where I take my talents for teaching, for organizing. And she becomes staff member at Highlander. She brings Esau there. She brings Bernice Robinson. And there they come up with this idea for organizing and empowering
Yes.
the poor, the unlettered, the ones who've been forgotten in the rural South, and saying, you are citizens, we're going to make you eligible for the vote. And so I think what you focus on here is so important, that she had to overcome not only the animosity and the cruelty of the white backlash to civil rights, but she had to work within her own community to convince people that it was worthwhile, it was important, it was patriotic to stand up. And but first you have to learn your history, and that becomes part of, you have to learn to read and write. You have to have readiness from within. I think that's the most beautiful phrase that she uttered. She says, you have to be ready from within. And that means spiritually ready, psychologically ready, politically ready, to stand up and say, I am an American citizen and I am owed these rights. And I demand to have full public accommodations, and I demand the vote.
I want to ask you to turn the lens for just a moment, to
Mhm.
come out of the book. And as the writer of this, you employed a very interesting strategy. And I'll just use Mrs. Clark as an example. Like on one page, I was looking at page 13, for example. At one point, you call her Mrs. Clark. And I felt a little bit distant from her because, Mrs., you start thinking of the elder. Then another part, you just call her Clark. And I felt kind of more comfortable with her. And in another section, right on the same page, you call her by her whole name. So can you talk about just that strategy of loan that
Oh,
pulls the right reader in and out of the person's story?
okay. You really touched. This was a real uh I won't say problem, but this was something I had to wrestle with. And here's why. I would have loved to call her Septima
Mhm.
through the book again, to have that sense of
Mhm.
intimacy, for my reader to feel the intimacy. But all her life, Septima Clark wanted to be called by her full name,
Mm.
because in the South, Black people were not called by their Christian and their surname. She's a widow. She's briefly married. It's a very kind of heartbreaking story about her marriage, but she is briefly married. She's a mother. And so she wants to be called Mrs. Clark. And she goes on campaigns in Charleston, when the newspaper just, calls her Clark or Septima Clark. She writes to them and says, I am Mrs. Clark, just as you would call a white woman Mrs. McGillicuddy. I deserve that honorific. And she insisted on it. I mean, if she went to a meeting and they just had Septima Clark, she would cross it out and write Mrs. Septima Clark. And so I thought I had to honor that.
Mhm.
That's why I call her Mrs. Clark, in points where I think she would want to be called Mrs. Clark. I do step back when I'm talking about either her relationship to her family or her relationship to her close friends. I feel more comfortable using Septima. But that's why there's this, believe me, it drove me crazy. And at one point I was actually going to write a little forward, like note from the author to explain why there was this difference. Editorially, Clark would have been the kind of neutral, as that's how it would work in most books. You would just use the surname. But I wanted to honor her wishes to be called Mrs. Clark, but I wanted the reader at points that seemed appropriate to know her as Septima, which is what her family called her Seppi.
I love that. I thought it was just such an unusual tactic to like pull the reader in and out.
It took a
It took
it took a
lot.
lot of time. Yeah.
I want to pull out some things from the book, and then talk about a few of the central characters. I know we're running out of time. I was just so excited in reading it. So one of the things that stepped out to me was in Project C. So, folks, if you have the book, I'm over on page 237. But it was something where Mrs. Clark is talking to her students when she's saying, do you think you can take the slaps? Like, this is what, like, when I think of Highlander, I think of it as the place to train you. And she goes on to say, because they will slap your face or they will knock you down. Do you think you can take it? If you can't, don't go down. Stay in this room with me. To me, that gets right to the heart of, sharpening the sword against being passive, being
Mhm.
apathetic, and telling people you have to make the choice to be like ready from within.
Yeah. Yes. And yeah, this was in preparation for the Birmingham
Yes, Project
campaign.
C.
Right.
Yes.
And where they will be beaten and the dogs will be let loose and the fire hoses will be leashed upon them. And that sense of we are a nonviolent movement and you have to be able to just stand this. And these are children. These weren't even the adults. She was actually talking to children. This was the children's army, the children's crusade. And it was difficult for her because she's a teacher. She loves all children, but she's putting the steel in their spine and saying, you have to be able to withstand terrible pressures and terrible blows, but you have to remain nonviolent. And this is not easy. I mean, the whole movement deals with that throughout the whole duration of whether to be nonviolent. What is it, a method or is it a philosophy? And that's, that's a bigger question, but that's certainly part of what she's doing. And that even in the citizenship schools, and those we learn about that because they really become the organizing structure for building the grassroots of the entire movement. And these are for adults. So these come out of Esau Jenkins and his idea of teaching his neighbors to be able to read and write to pass the literacy tests. There were literacy test requirements, which were totally, totally unfair and discriminatory. They were only imposed on Black people. Some of them were crazy. I mean, some of the questions, you can get these online. I have some on that I've put up, and they ask incredibly obscure questions about the Constitution of South Carolina, whatever. The citizenship schools were designed by Septima Clark, and Bernice Robinson becomes the first teacher. And these allow these people who were deprived of an education by the Jim Crow schools, and because they were poor and they had to work in the fields when they're 6 or 7 years old. So they can only go to school sporadically. It's teaching them not only how to read and write and learning the South Carolina or whatever, these were in 11, all the southern states by the end. It is, again, getting them ready for within. These are adults. Some of them are 18, some of them are 80. And they've never been able to write their name before. They've had to use an X. And so the first, there's a description, which I just love, of the first lesson, which is behind a grocery store. These were kept secret because it's still dangerous to teach Black people to read and write in order to vote, just as it was in slavery. And so they build a secret room behind a grocery store on Johns Island. And so it's kept without windows. As Septima said, we didn't want the white people to know what was going on. And
Latte, madame.
they have to teach people to hold their pencils. And these are manual laborers for the most part. Their hands are so strong. You hear pencils cracking all over the room because they've never held a pencil before. But once they can sign their names, it changes them. They don't have to use an X. Their sense of personhood and agency really blossoms. And so these citizenship schools, when there'll be 900 of them in the next 15 years, not only train tens of thousands of potential voters, but it really instills a sense of agency and citizenship. You are a citizen. There will be many trials until that happens, but it's Septima who really gives them the sense that this is not only teaching to the literacy test. This is developing the whole person.
I want to talk about two other characters. And folks, just the section on Diane Nash is something that to just read about her life, right? Because you're getting all of these spotlights that are taking place, but two of them spoke to me that I wanted to just mention. One is the incredible way that you tell about what happened to Fannie Lou Hamer. And I pulled this one out because yesterday, of course, was Fannie Lou Hamer's birthday. So, I've been thinking a lot about her, but that you go into detail. And folks, I'm over on page 241. So I'll give you these pages so when you get them, get the book, get those pages. But it actually outlines what happened to Fannie Lou Hamer, how she was beaten, how she was raped, how they actually had Black men beat her. And when they got exhausted, then the white officers took over and just beat her almost to a pulp. But that when she's laying and bleeding and bruised and had been raped, she was still singing songs.
Yeah.
And what struck me here was that her singing these songs reminds me of the first time that she came to Highlander and she sang This Little Light of Mine.
Yeah.
And then it became a part of the staple of Highlander. Like that was a line through. So can you talk a little bit about just Fannie Lou Hamer and how her activism really motivated people back at the Highlander?
Oh, yeah. She's just an extraordinary woman. She's in her 40s, and she's lived as a sharecropper all her life, as a child, as a married woman. And her husband and two daughters live in a shack. She can read and write, and so she's a timekeeper. But as she admits, she was never told. She's in her mid 40s. This is 1962 or three. She had no idea that Black people could vote or should vote, or there was any provision for them to vote. I mean, that was just so beyond the life on the plantation that she lived. And she hears James Bevel, Reverend Bevel, and organizing and singing. And he had a great voice, singing in a church near her home in Mississippi. And she goes in because she hears the music, and she has a wonderful voice too. And they're saying you should go to register to vote. And this is like from Mars. She's never heard of anything like that, but she realizes how important this could be. And she volunteers. She says, I'll go try to pass the literacy test. I can read and write. And she does go, and she tries to pass it. And of course, it's a rigged test. They don't allow her. But she becomes a citizenship school teacher and trains with Septima Clark and enters the movement, goes to work with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, is an incredible organizer, and uses her singing as part of that. And she sings. She wasn't with the Freedom Singers, but she often sings with them. Singing is a through line through this book. The music is really important to the story and how that evolves. And so Fannie Lou Hamer is returning from an advanced teacher training session with Septima Clark when the bus going back home to Mississippi is stopped because they tried to desegregate a road stop bus stop, and she's beaten so terribly, along with some staff of the citizenship schools, Arnell Ponder. And when she's still recuperating from that, she goes to Congress and is testifying. That's before her famous 64 appearance at the Atlantic City Democratic Convention. But she becomes this incredible leader and starts her own political party in Mississippi, confronts Congress, confronts the Democratic Party, builds an amazing cooperative farm in Mississippi. I mean, she's just incredible. And again, comes into the movement through being a citizenship school teacher, which is why I can tell her story as part of this project.
Yeah, I loved having that road with her. I just want to highlight, I guess, two or three other parts that struck me, and then I'll ask a final question. And I know we have probably some questions in the queue, but what I was really moved by was the pictures. So there's a
Ah,
small section in there, and I stopped and said, "Wow, every one of these pictures could be another book."
oh
So
yeah.
the I mean, it's just that you could go. I'm thinking of the picture of Rosa Parks. So people don't realize, of course, that the narrative about Rosa Parks was that she was just tired and she just kind
Yeah.
of didn't get up. But
Yeah.
that Rosa Parks at the Highlander, that picture of her at the Highlander when she's young, juxtaposed against the picture of her at the Highlander when she's older with
Yeah.
Mrs. Clark, I think it's just incredible because both of them, in terms of committing themselves to the movement, we don't talk enough about what Rosa Parks lost as a result of that,
Absolutely.
having to move, couldn't get high. So I think that was incredible. The picture of Eleanor Roosevelt at the Highlander School, right? So
Right.
that was just really incredible. And even the picture of Dr. King in 1957 at the Highlander School, and you included newspaper clippings of King teaching at the communist school, right?
Right.
So that it helps people to understand that. So those are some things I just wanted to highlight. And then the last question I have for you, which comes at the end. And I want to note that something that you did that I want to thank you for is that typically in books like this, the story ends and you're left with questions. I want to thank you for including a couple pages at the end that,
Yeah.
that kind of completes the person's story, that
Yeah.
tells us what happens next so that we can look and go, okay, so it doesn't end here.
Right.
It ends in an incredible way. But you end with Septima, of course, Mrs. Clark, who is our main central hero. And I want to go to this quote at the end. And then just have you kind of connect this back to someone who started by saying, I just wanted to show the number one problem,
Mhm.
apathy and passivity, to her at the end saying, after getting an honorary doctorate from a university she walked by, the
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter, with all of that, she then says, and this is your last line in the book, I just tried to create a little chaos. Chaos is a good thing. God created the whole world out of it. Change is what comes out of it. So I want to have you just kind of connect that to the Mrs. Clark we meet at the beginning, over 50 years old, who does this incredible second half of her life.
Yeah. You're right, Kay. This was, I found her life just inspirational. Again, she's in deep middle age when this happened. She's a widow. She has financial problems all the rest of her life because she lost her pension. She's paid by Highlander, but and then of course, the citizenship schools are then transferred to Dr. King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So she's working with Dr. King throughout the movement, with Dorothy Cotton, with Ella Baker to a certain extent, with Andy Young, who's her boss, and she goes through this. She lives this peripatetic life, and she still believes in the power of the people to both organize and demand their rights, to become citizens. And then she brings it on this journey that, okay, now you have to vote. You have to learn about the candidates. You have to learn to be an intelligent voter, a educated voter, which is also, of course, a goal of the League of Women Voters from the beginning. And you have to believe that you are a first-class citizen. You, uh, Black American, Black child, you can be an officer. You should run for office. And so one of the things that um, just before that quote about creating a little chaos is Septima Clark does run for office, and she's almost 80 years old when she does. That really hit me. And so does Bernice Robinson run for
Yes.
office. And so they're practicing what they preached all those years.
Wonderful. Thank you. I want to turn it back to Nikki. Did you want to bring some questions into it?
Thank
so
you,
much,
Kay. This
Elaine.
is
Thank
just a
you.
great conversation. I want to keep
No, I'm
going.
enjoying it. Yes, I love it.
This is the fastest 40 minutes of my life, so I really appreciate you both being here. We will not have time for all the questions, so an apology, but we do have quite a few. So I'm going to ask you both to keep your thoughts short so we can get through some. All of the questions are applicable to both of our speakers, so thank you guys for being so mindful of that. So I'm going to get started. When we start the book, the nightmare of slavery sort of hangs over our characters, right? Many of them had parents born into slavery. Some of the people that they were working with were either slaves themselves or could remember coming right out of that.
Yeah.
It's the opinion that Jim Crow is still very much hanging over a lot of our country, especially in the South today. Now, you wrote about Jim Crow in this, but how do both of you kind of see, this effect happening in today's environment?
Kaye,
Yeah, Dr. Whitehead, please.
So I'll start. And thank you for the question. One of the things I think about, and the book does a very good job, if you capture from Plessy 1896 to Brown 1954, you're talking about what a lot of people refer to as the nadir of Black American history, when we had our rights being severely eroded that had been established during Reconstruction. And people were willing to put their body on the line in pursuit of this idea of democracy. Like it was something that was, believed and held on to. So it had to be powerful to be willing to put your children in the front, to have Dr. King say, well, if the adults don't go, send the babies. Like someone's got to be there, even if it's children. So that scene that you write of Mrs. Clark talking to children, we have to remember she's telling children, if you can't be beaten and not respond, then you shouldn't go. I connect that to today, and I'm watching the erosion of our rights, and I am not sure if people completely understand that democracy is fragile. And like Thomas Jefferson once wrote, and I always answer and say I never agree with Thomas Jefferson, except in this one quote where he said that sometimes the tree of liberty has to be watered with the blood of tyrants and patriots. That sometimes you have to be willing to put your body on the line. And I am not sure if people understand the real cost of having to defend democracy.
That's a very powerful thought. And I think, when I started this book in 2019, I believed it was an important story to tell. It not, certainly parts have been told in superb fashion by other historians, but pulling it together and putting Septima Clark at the center, I thought was important. What I could not have imagined, and in my wildest nightmares, that we would be in this moment now, where not only is a story like the one I tell, an important American history story, an important, which you can't tell without Black history. There is no American history without Black history. And the idea that this is the kind of book that wants to be erased in the current administration approach. And the idea that we are fighting not only for voting rights now, but for our constitutional rights. And what I think about what would Septima do? What would Septima do? She'd be out there. She would be telling people, know your rights, demand them. Don't let your representatives off the hook. Don't let your community leaders off the hook. You have to be out there. This is, again, the tree of liberty. And I think one of the things that struck me so forcibly in the research was the kind of punishment that these patriots did suffer. It wasn't always physical. It was often economic. It was destroying families through economic retribution. And the idea that trying to go after the infrastructure of equality and, diversity, equity, and inclusion is just equality. And that should be a goal, not a a point of a target. So I did not expect this book to be as relevant. It pains me that it's that relevant. But I think if we see this story, how these very ordinary people, these aren't the orators, the great churchmen who led the movement like Dr. King. They're not the fiery students like John Lewis and James Bevel and Stokely Carmichael. They're working class people, and they stood up. Parents of children stood up and said, no, this is America. We don't do this. We can't. And so to me, this is the essence of democracy and the essence of patriotism.
Thank you. So this one is a little on the nose, but in today's environment, a lot of the organizers and organizations that we see want to be seen as out front on the issues. They want people to know this is what we care about. But what we're reading in your book is that the organizations took a really methodical approach to these. They weren't just focusing on one thing. So they had legal action, education, support, systems, leadership, visions.
Yeah.
But that doesn't seem to be the case so much anymore. And we're seeing fragments across movements now. Do either of you have any thoughts about that?
Well, what we call the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century, because there have been others, was multifaceted, and it did take years to develop. And there was not, it was not a completely united front, as we know. There were somewhat different goals, certainly different methods, and there was conflict within the movement. And this probably made it stronger, but it did take years to develop. What we find ourselves in now, though certainly voting rights have been under attack for years, and the League is out there, as many other organizations, trying to prevent the erosion of our voting rights. But it's only been, I know it seems like years, it's only been a few months since we've been in the terror that we're in right now. And that means in some ways we haven't had time to structure a coherent response. I hope we don't have to deal with this for many, many years and are able to build structures. I hope that won't happen, but it's clear we're going to have to think on our feet a little more quickly. And I think I do see some encouraging emerging strategies, and I give enormous credit to those in the legal system who are standing up, who are putting those lawsuits up to the courts, and to those judges who are going to defend the Constitution.
Yeah, I would add and actually push back a bit on the question. Because I'm the president of ASALH. ASALH is the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. It is Carter G. Woodson's organization. So I set the Black History Month theme. That is my job as the head of ASALH, and I do the protection work around freedom schools and Black history. We've been working for years. I don't think people have been paying attention, but we meet, the civil rights organizations, we have bi-weekly meetings where I'm meeting with the head of the NAACP, Legal Defense Fund, Janae. I'm meeting, Reverend Sharpton's there from the National Urban League. You have, National Action Network. You have NUL, Urban League. You have Mark Moria. We're all meeting, organizing, and strategizing on a regular. We're having protest marches in Washington, D.C. We're putting out op-eds. We're putting out lesson plans. We're running freedom schools around the country that are being funded by Mellon. So I wonder if people are either A, so shell-shocked that they don't realize that there has been organizing on this.
Mhm.
B is the fact that they think that we're just getting started, because even on my radio show, I spent almost 14 months talking about Project 2025 every single day on my radio show and laying out strategy so that when J20 came, we were able to hit the ground running. So I would just encourage people to think about the fact that it is happening. The fragmentation, it is less about being fragmented than about people figuring out their lane. So Janae Nelson leads up the Legal Defense Fund. I'm leaving that to her. When it comes to protecting Black
Yeah.
history and freedom school, Janae turns to me. Like, we're all trying to figure out
Right.
how do we keep the organizing moving forward. It is happening. And we are very clear that this collapse is taking place. I've been in conversation with both Timothy Snyder and Jason Stanley. If you read the book, Timothy
Yeah,
Snyder
right.
on Tyranny, Jason Stanley, How Fascism Works. I was working with them doing freedom schools and doing critical race theory summer school for the last 3 years. So when they resigned and moved to Toronto,
Yeah.
it was not surprising, but it was horrifying.
Yeah.
And
No,
the
I
next
agree.
question that came after that was, what about you? We did, critical race theory summer school. Kimberly Crenshaw and I, who of course
Yeah.
one of the creators of critical race theory and intersectionality, we travel all over the country. People, let me just tell you, we are organizing. We have strategies. We're putting them out, and we're just encouraging people, just connect with us, because that's where the disconnect is. People are stepping back and they're like, oh, nothing's happening. There's a lot happening. And we need more help to spread the news about what's going on.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you for that. And I know that that's been happening. And so I just wanted to emphasize that we all have to get on the
Yeah,
bus
get
here.
on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just want to say thank you to you both, Dr. Whitehead and Elaine Weiss, author of Spell
Thank
Freedom.
you.
It was good.
This was so amazing. Can we please tell us where everybody in the audience can find you both? Social media, radio show, other books?
Elaine, please.
Oh, well, I'm not a huge social media presence, but I certainly have a website, just elaineweiss.com. My book, The Woman's Hour, again, I came to the story because I wanted to track what happened after the 19th Amendment. How were Black women? They were working all the time to regain the right to vote in the Jim Crow South. So this came out of that question of what happened after. And so I think reading the two books is an interesting experience. And I hope to be speaking around the country to organizations, to schools, to I want to talk to Kaye about bringing the book to the freedom
Yes.
schools. And the
I would
freedom
love to.
schools were based on the citizenship school.
Yes.
So as was the algebra project. So there's this
Bob Moses.
right? Bob Moses part of the book. So there's this whole. So Kaye, you are out there. You can be
Yeah.
found.
Yeah, so you can find me. You can find me every day on the radio from 3
Yeah.
to 6 p.m. on 88.9 FM. But connect with me. I think that if you're looking for strategies, I lay them out every single day, because I do think that democracy is on fire, and we need more firefighters. We need people who are going to run to the fire, not make s'mores on the sideline, but like run to the fire and help us to put it out and hold the line.
Well, thank you both. And thank you everyone for attending. Just a shout out to the league members who are here. They are from all across the country. So I appreciate you both being able to speak to Americans and not just Marylanders tonight. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. We will stay in touch. I look forward to it.
Yes, absolutely.
I look
Please.
forward to it. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Everyone. Thank you.